I don't know Lindsay personally, but let me tell you that what Lindsay, when Lindsay first blew the whistle on the offshore oil reserves off Alaska, on the Lomonosov Ridge, he was absolutely spot on. I mean, it was one of the worst kept secrets in the oil industry that, you know, the reserves that were classified off the north coast of Alaska, of course, provided all of the potential for the US to be self-sufficient. But the US government knows that it cannot explain to the people why it needs to create the global economy by pumping the petrodollar into the market. And the only way they can do that is either by giving money away, which they do to Israel, of course, and ironically, the amount of money that the US gives to Israel every year is, near as damn it, exactly equal to the amount of money it gives to Saudi Arabia in return for the oil it imports from Saudi Arabia. And as for Lindsay's comments on the Gulf Coast, I mean, I think that Lindsay's expressing the concerns that the Russians have for sure. And of course, if Lindsay is, and his, there's some Italian oceanographers as well that have also shared the view, if they are correct that the Gulf Stream is stalling, then it means that we are in for a hell of a ride in terms of temperatures in Northern Europe. And it's going to be the complete opposite of anthropogenic global warming.
Will you please share your own opinion on that?
I mean, I don't know. To be frank, I haven't seen any evidence which I would say is definitive in terms of the Gulf current stalling. There's no question. I mean, it's an ecological disaster of the most outrageous order. And to be honest, if the Gulf Coast stream stalls and we have effectively a permanent winter, I mean, we may see a temperature drop of 5 degrees plus, which of course would have a dramatic impact on our ability to grow crops in Northern Europe. So that in itself is a problem. If the Gulf Coast stream hasn't stalled, then it's bringing the toxic crap across to Northern Europe, unless, of course, the Earth is able to work its magic as it comes across the Atlantic. So, right now, I can't be definitive on that.
Thank you.
Okay? Question over here, and then one here.
Can I ask, I heard Keith Crowther talking about that life in the Gulf of Mexico is 90% dead.
Yeah, the Gulf is a dead zone. Now, one of the effects of Corexit, what it's done is the dispersant has broken up the slick and it's also forced it underwater. Now, of course, that has the cosmetic effect of making it look as though it's disappeared. But what it's actually done is it's created this subsea layer which is blocking all sunlight. So everything that's living beneath this layer is effectively dying. Or, as you've seen here, is effectively poisoned. Because, I mean, by the flesh-eating bacteria. So, I mean, there is no question here. I mean, certainly I won't be going back to the US anytime soon, and I can promise you I will never, ever touch seafood in the US, or probably anywhere around the Gulf of Mexico, if I went back there. And, it's thanks be to God that, we've got fishermen in the Gulf who are acknowledging the risk and refusing to fish. But some of them are saying, well, it's the only way we've got to live. We're talking about a very poor region in the United States here.
I also hear that the BP has to pay less tax if they can not see so much oil at the surface.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, what's happening is that BP is mitigating. I mean, BP is now effectively under American control. I mean, it's still on the British Stock Exchange, but I mean, the bottom line is that for the first time in its history, BP has a US chief executive whose loyalties are effectively with the US oil industry. So what we're going to see, I think, over time is BP being spun off. It's going to be broken up because the US oil industry does not like the fact that BP is larger than any US oil company right now. So it's going to be broken up, spun off over time. And of course they've reached this arrangement with Halliburton. So Halliburton has said, okay, mitigation, we'll pick up some of the liability here. But of course, what they're going to do is they're just going to amortise that across future contracts. I mean, you know, this is the tragedy, and I mean, it absolutely appalls me that my former company, Schlumberger, is just not saying anything. But on the other hand, you know, if I revert back to the way I would think back when I was in the oil industry, I can understand why. Because, you know, they do not want to be seen to be rocking the boat. They do not want a situation where they cannot tender for any BP contract. So it's just better that they keep their mouth shut. And that's until such time as the power of subpoena is granted to the Gulf Coast hearings. You know, there's no risk. Absolutely no risk. So the only, I mean, a lot of the information that I've shared regarding Schlumberger, fortunately other people have also posted on the web, so you know, I'm not just a lone voice here. But how long that stays on the web, that's why I wanted to get the DVD recorded as soon as possible, to actually get out there the fact that Schlumberger not only knew what was going on, but they tried to stop it, they tried to shut it down and were overridden. But they, at the end of the day, the oil industry is you know, a very tight, very incestuous community, and so they're keeping their mouth shut. But if you know anybody who's thinking of going to Florida anytime soon, I mean, just ask them to do their own research. Ask them to Google, you know, Gulf oil spill. I mean, people are leaving Florida. I mean, there's actually organisations set up in the US now to help people migrate away from Florida. I mean, the property market has tanked. You're not going to read anything about this because there's 200,000 people in Florida that have stopped paying their mortgages. Now, if one person stops paying their mortgage, they're a pariah to society. When 200,000 people stop paying their mortgage, that's a movement. And the reason they've stopped paying their mortgages is because the Gulf Coast disaster, of course, has tanked, totally tanked the property market in Florida. And so, basically, thanks to the internet, all these people sort of managed to communicate with each other, realising, of course, that they were in negative equity, i.e., you know, the borrowing is greater than the value of the house. So they've worked out that there's not enough bailiffs in Florida to evict them all. So if they stop paying their mortgage, they could potentially live rent and mortgage free for maybe 5 years. And then when they get evicted, the money that they've saved, they'll just go rent somewhere else. You know, by the way, what's happening in Florida is going to be, you know, happening in Europe, not directly because of the Gulf spill, but you know, the financial meltdown is going to continue to push down property prices, and more people are going to find themselves in negative equity. And the reason that you're not going to find anything in the mainstream media about what's going on in Florida is because they don't want to give anybody any ideas here in Europe. Sorry, there's a gentleman here first.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you, sir, please. First, if you look, mostly big bosses which come to position in the United States, they're Wall Street Americans, like John Deutsch, like CIA bosses, John Negroponte, like many, what is called Richard Holbrooke. They get position in the United Nations, as they call Bordello Nation,
yeah,
you know, which is the most legal terrorist organization on our planet. Now, the next war for petroleum will happen in Sudan, because China imports 70% of their oil from Sudan. Now, when we look what is going on, they want to separate South Sudan from the rest of the country. Already lots of heavy weapons, tanks, artillery. The United States have, as I know, 32 top high-ranking officers of African race, which is both in Uganda, Sudan and Kenya. They have private armies, they have mercenaries. If we look even the pirates of Somalia, they are blessing by United States 5th Fleet. They get information from London which ship pirates of Somalia will invade. Now the insurance companies get money 18% up on every single boat which is going to pass Arabian Sea, going to Red Sea, Suez, Mediterranean, or back on the way to Indian Ocean. And if, I mean, we look, Albert Gore, Vice President of the United States, he get Nobel Prize for Environment. But under Albert Gore have been burning 20% of oil in Kuwait, and United States didn't stop, especially Halliburton, didn't stop flames of Kuwait, this kind of disaster will come in atmosphere. I'd like to ask you, how much is involved Wall Street Americans, bank system which was controlled by Zionist Americans, State of Israel, which rule United States, how much they are involved in disaster on our planet? Thank you.
I think you answered it. I mean, there's no question. I mean, let's of course separate. There's absolutely no doubt. It's not Zionists, it's Sionists, but it's Sionists with an S. Again, I implore you, if you don't want to buy my DVD, I'm sure you can find it somewhere on Google Video. But I talk about the Zionist agenda. Now, let's not confuse Zionism with Judaism. Okay, the most anti-Semitic agenda on the planet is that of the Zionists. The Zionists hide behind Judaism. And it's called Sion because Sion is otherwise known as Mount Hermon. And Mount Hermon is very, very important in terms of 2012.
And you know, possible that Hardakovsky, who was frontman of Rothschild family, he owned the what's called Yukos, and he stand on foot of Czechist boys, you know, Cheka. That is for first name of KGB, you know, and he is now in the jail. But Hardakovsky have been even working in beginning in trafficking of the ladies from Russia to make a show of the fashion, sold this most beautiful woman to State of Israel, and from State of Israel later on, same ladies they are sold in Las Vegas and around the world. But nobody didn't talk his dirty tricks. And second thing is, this is Rothschild family and State of Norway, which together have been given $2.5 billion to Georgia in Caucasus. Georgia will open the war 2008, August. They will invade what's called Russian Federation, when Russia sent the army and crushed the Georgians.
Let me stop you because we're past the questions, but I mean, clearly you need to be up on here and giving your interpretation of the geopolitical arena. But you're right, I mean, listen, the machinations of geopolitics run very, very deep. I mean, all I've done tonight is scratch the surface. But, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Halford Mackinder, you know, tried to get to the root of this nearly 100 years ago, and, you know, he was only ever able to scratch the surface. But the major players, if you want to see what's going on, you know, without the detail, because there's detail, of course, occurring all around. But if you want to look at what's occurring, then absolutely read the works of Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski.
You know, he was half-brother of Poppy Dopey, John Paul II.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, next question, yeah? My name is Dita Rietma, and I am General Secretary of Baltic Sea Regional Radioactivity Watch. And the thing is that we have the most radioactive sea in the world. And talking about Israel, there is something very unexpected probably for everybody here in the hall, although I expect we are very educated people here. There has been a study of fertility in Israel recently done, where they have found 40% decrease of male fertility. It came previous year, this study result, and males were analyzed from 2004 to 2008, and it's probably Iraq war, depleted uranium and uranium weapon fallout in the region. And these studies haven't been done in the whole region there, but they could be significant for the whole region. And the uranium aerosols are working their way through the whole globe area. So fertility is in a crisis, and we could be facing sort of one generation of healthy babies. So I would ask your comment on this, and I would like to invite you to cooperate on a new subject, because it could be crucial. Thanks.
Okay. There's no question that depleted uranium is horrendous. I mean, Norman Schwarzkopf, by the way, a little known, Norman Schwarzkopf was really pissed off that he couldn't go all the way to Baghdad in the first Gulf War. and he was caught with, when he thought he was off the microphone, he was caught as saying, we might not have got to Baghdad, but we've poisoned their water supply for the next few millennia. You know, and obviously, I mean, we know the horrendous birth deformities that have been created by depleted uranium. And, I mean, there is no question. By the way, the fertility issue is global, is absolutely global. There was an analysis done of water supplies in all major US cities about 7 or 8 years ago. And the levels of estrogen were phenomenal. And this is obviously attributed to 40 years, just 40 years of the birth control pill. And of course the birth control pill, I mean the estrogen is not totally absorbed by the body, so it just is peed out and goes straight back into the water supply. By the way, it's not just estrogen, it's Prozac and a whole bunch of other sort of commonly prescribed pharmaceuticals. Anyway, a university in the UK picked up on this report and then did a survey of a dozen cities in the UK, and the same thing. They discovered very, very high levels of estrogen. We've got a sperm count that's reduced by 40% in the Western world. And let me tell you, that consider a science fiction scenario. Consider a science fiction scenario where there is a race of people, or something, a race of something, that wanted to take over the planet. But they couldn't take it over by force. They basically had to sort of create a situation where the population on that planet effectively self-destructed, self-annihilated. Because we're in a situation where in the space of literally a few generations, basically since the end of the Second World War, in just a few generations, we're seeing health deteriorate. I personally, I'll tell you what, one of the things I don't believe is I don't believe that the population is at 6.7 billion people. I believe that's a scare, and it's another Club of Rome statement. Those of you who remember the Club of Rome report from 1990, where they said that we're developing a strategy where humanity becomes the enemy of itself. So let's create the perception that the planet's overpopulated when it isn't, and we've got a massive falling birth rate. I mean, if you look at most Western countries, there's phenomenal numbers of properties that are empty. I mean, there's not a demand. I mean, okay, we know we've got homeless people, but there's way more property empty than there is people to fill it. Now, what's happening here? We've got immigration, of course, in Europe, particularly from east to west, that's pumping up the population. But I don't believe the surveys that tell us that we're at 6.7. When my grandfather came from a generation of 15 people, and that was quite common. At the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, it's quite common for there to be very large families. Now we've got a situation where the average age in Europe of a woman having their, Western Europe rather, a woman having their first child is 29. So I don't believe that the population is as high as it's cracked to be. And there's no question that this multi-pronged attack, which I call biospiritual warfare. I don't claim any originality for the phrase, although I thought I dreamed it up. I googled and found that Leonard Horowitz had been using it for 10 years. But it's a biospiritual warfare. It's an attack on humanity. And the thing is that once we realise what's going on, we can actually take responsibility and do something about it. In Ireland, where I've just come back from speaking tour there, has the most heavily fluoridated water in the world. Fluoride has nothing to do with teeth. Fluoride was used by the Germans to keep their concentration camp population docile. It was used by the Russians in the gulags to control the population. It was used by a number of states in the US in their penitentiary system to keep the prison population docile. It's a dumbing down chemical. It's a poison. So we've got fluoride, we've got chemtrails, we've got GM foods, we've got vaccines. Now we've got the Gulf Coast, we've got depleted uranium. I mean, it is a multi-pronged attack on humanity. But like I said earlier, once you actually are aware of it, you can do something about it. Is it an accident? Is it coincidence that the chemtrails appear to have stopped across Western Europe with the release of G. Edward Griffin's film, What on Earth Are They Spraying? Because they know now that people are aware. So, you know, that's why I say that actually raising awareness from the grassroots is, on all these issues, is probably the most important thing that we can be doing. Because this isn't about the media. And that's why I certainly don't crave any attention from the media. Because the moment that this gets into the media, that's the point at which the opposition, if you like, then start campaigns to demonise and dismiss. You know, whereas because they'll control the narrative, what we need to be doing is obviously encouraging people to look at this for themselves and come to their own conclusions and realisations.
Ian, will you be willing to... I feel that I have not been clarified around the oil spill. If it was a corporate mistake and cover-up, or whether it was orchestrated.
No, it was orchestrated. Orchestrated, and Rob Kaluza was the mechanic.
I wanted you to say
yeah,
that.
Rob Kaluza, there's no doubt in my mind now. I mean, I resisted saying that for 6 weeks, nearly 6 weeks after the event. But I'm absolutely of the opinion, and that's why Kaluza has gone into hiding. That's why he's pleaded the Fifth. It's why that the Gulf Coast hearings will not be given the power of subpoena, because the corporatists cannot afford for Kaluza to appear before the hearings. And Matthew Simmons, by the way, the other thing that Matthew Simmons was the guy who went on MSNBC and stated that Kaluza was a 32-year-old punk who had no right to be on the rig and needed to answer the hard questions. But yeah, it was a contrived event.
This Gulf Stream stalling you talk about, is it because this oil leak? Or
yeah, the Corexit.
Yeah.
I mean, but basically what's happening is the viscosity of the water, natural seawater, obviously has been increased dramatically.
You didn't talk so much about what's coming. You said the worst things will come. And you didn't talk about this volcano under the bottom of the Gulf who is near to explode. What do you know about that?
The
volcano.
Oh, the volcano. I mean, listen, I mean, there's been supposition on that for probably 7 months now. There is no question. I mean, I was getting some reports from some of my former geologist friends in the Gulf Coast who back in May were forecasting a very, very high risk of a tsunami event. Now, because basically the pressure, I mean, this reservoir is under phenomenal pressure. I mean, that's why the well blew, basically, because they just didn't have any equipment that could contain this pressure. And I mean, there was a lot of evidence to suggest that BP's own geologists were telling them not to drill here because the pressures were unknown and it wasn't sure whether the existing technology could cope with these kind of pressures, which have been estimated up to 100,000 psi. So yeah, there was a lot of supposition that having opened up the reservoir, that the pressure would be so great on the seabed that the seabed would explode. Now, when Mount St. Helens blew in 1982, Mount St. Helens, the top of Mount St. Helens rose by, I think it was close to like 300 feet. I mean, it was literally the whole of the mountain lifted up. And it was when it blew, I mean, the pyroclastic cloud destroyed, I think, like about 30 miles worth of forest. Unfortunately, it was, I mean, apart from a few tourists who wanted to go see this rising mountain, but unfortunately, the death toll wasn't that high. But if this happened, I mean, in the sea, because what you've got to remember is that at this depth, the pressure is basically a metric ton per square inch. So there's phenomenal pressure pushing down on the seabed. So if this thing did blow, and it's near as damn it a mile deep water, but if this thing did blow, then the tsunami would wipe out Florida. I mean, it would probably push 50 miles inland into Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, probably go right up the Mississippi, a long way. But it would literally wipe out Florida because Florida has no high ground, so the whole thing would just wash right across Florida. I mean, there's no question. I mean, we must still consider that to be a potential risk, but I think that the longer time goes on, it's probably not so much of a risk.
Is the well capped yet? Is it still leaking?
I believe it is. I believe it is still leaking.
Oh, in the same rate?
I can't answer that, I don't know. I mean, there's no reason to suggest not, because we don't know how big this reservoir is. So, yeah, sure, it could well be leaking at this rate. Now, the only thing that would reduce the pressure, but it would still maintain the rate, is if the borehole has opened up. Of course, then it would not be gushing at quite the same pressure, but it would still be oozing out. And like I said, you know, the pressure, the natural pressure of the seabed is a metric ton, which gives you some idea of what pressure the reservoir must be at, because it's forcing out through a metric ton worth of, you know, PSI at the level of the seabed. But I believe, as did Matthew Simmons, I believe that the well hasn't been capped, and I believe that it's the Corexit that's been added to it which is preventing it from coming to the surface, and that's why we've got the massive, you saw the footage at the start of my presentation of the dead fish there, you know, and you heard the commentary. There's no evidence to suggest that this is related directly to the oil spill. You know, give me a break.
Sure.
I'm going to take one more question, because now I know we have to get out of here by a particular time.
Okay.
Oh,
I'd like to just tell everyone, you need to know that Lockerbie airplane, Boeing 747, on board have been 6 CIA agents, which company want to be off. Doesn't matter for other 300, which gone to paradise or hell. That was business by CIA and British intelligence service. You can use my name when you talk.
okay, next question.
The motive to start the well blower at BP, who's behind that?
Say again?
What was the motive to create the blowout?
It's a population reduction event. It's already, I mean, it's already taking people out in the Gulf Coast area. It's potentially going to make the whole of the southeast of the United States uninhabitable, because as the oil Corexit mix is sucked up into the Gulf Stream, I mean, look, go Google oil rain, and what you'll see is that all across the southeastern United States, the rainfall is polluted with oil. Now you can see the oil, you can't see the Corexit. You know, you've already got a situation where people are incredibly sick after swimming in their pools because of the Corexit that's in the pool. This is a population reduction event, and if anybody doubts the motivation of these guys, go Google Georgia Guidestones. Georgia Guidestones, which mysteriously appeared in Elbert County, Georgia in 1982. It's the 10 goals and objectives of those who perceive themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. Number 1 is reduce the population to less than 500 million in balance with nature.
Okay, could I just have the last one, since I have the mic? And I think it's a good question to end this with. I'm really curious about what organizations, media, nations, and famous people that would be friendly to this kind of a movement. What kind of, for example, Tea Party or Holland, or is there any like big thing in the world that would play the awakening people?
It's not obvious to me right now. I mean, for example, Ron Paul, I believe, would be a friend, but no, Ron Paul and the Tea Party's been hijacked by Sarah Palin. And that's, you know, we have to learn from the way these guys work. And probably the greatest opportunity that I had to learn the way these guys worked was in the 2.5 years that I was chairing the 9/11 Truth Movement in the UK. Because that gave me the opportunity to observe for 2.5 years how these guys infiltrate a movement to neuter it, to make it ineffectual. And indeed make me ineffectual. Because as the chair, I found myself, certainly in the sort of after about 6 months, I found myself bogged down by minutiae, you know, and dealing with the bullshit of within the movement and trying to keep the movement cohesive. And then eventually I realised what was going on, and I just thought, okay, this is a great education. It's a wonderful education. The way to move this forward is, I use the phrase collective individualism. You know, so basically we need to avoid creating organisations or participating in organisations, because the moment these guys see any organisation like the Tea Party, which actually had legs, but then they found a way to infiltrate the Tea Party, hijack it by putting Sarah Palin in the lead role, and now it's a, you know, it's a spent force. And Ron Paul is like, oh my God, you know, how do we let that one slip away? So, you know, there's plenty of good individuals, there's no question, and I believe that once we get the groundswell at the grassroots level to the 100th monkey, if you like, then I think it's just going to move organically. But until such time as we've got that grassroots awareness, then I don't think that organising is the right way forward.
Så vaken.se, ni måste kanske lägga ner det här.
I could try to answer that. Thank you for a very nice presentation. I think we all know that there's a lot of problems in the world, a lot of bad stuff going on, and it's because we all have these hierarchical thoughts in our minds, and that's what causes all of this. Thank you. So I would like to take the opportunity to present a book that's been published in December in Swedish. And all right, first time for me, I'm very nervous. All right, yeah, and the book is about spreading your awareness and your consciousness, and the thing that stops us from doing it is these hierarchic thoughts. And the book's name is in Finnish, alkuajatus, but in Swedish it's urtanken, it's the beginning thought. And yeah, if you want to know more, you can have a business card from us and after the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now I'm going to just share one last piece of Quero wisdom with you to bring to a close. What the Quero said is that we have to do two things to make the change, and it's pretty much in line with what you said to some extent, because what they said is that we absolutely have to find a way to make the contribution that we feel we have to make or need to make in the physical realm. You know, because the most powerful tools that these guys have in their armory, the most powerful tool they have is abdication. Because by definition, abdication means we know what's going on, but we specifically elect to do nothing. So that's their most powerful tool. The other tools that they have in their armory are apathy and willful ignorance. So the Quero say that, you know, basically we have to find a way, find whatever skills, resources, time that we can bring to bear to make the changes that we want to see in the physical realm. But in isolation, it's not enough. Because the other thing that we have to do, and their word initially was, we have to dream the future we want to see. Now, when we got into the discussion, we agreed that perhaps the more appropriate term was visualize. You know, so that we must also find the time, the quiet time, to visualize the future that we want to see. And what these guys said is that if we do that, if we can find the time to reach inside, to get into that contemplation space and visualize how we would like to see this pan out, but not have any existential commitment to that outcome, but it's just visualize. What they say then is, when we come down to making the contribution on the physical realm, our physical contribution will be that much more powerful. And their point is that one without the other is not enough. It's not enough just to do the physical, it's not enough just to do the visualization, we must do both. But you know, these guys said it's a prophecy. It doesn't have to happen. And that's what I believe, and that's why I'm here with you guys tonight. Thank you. I hope I did them justice.
Will there be a pole shift